So here we are with Neil Peart of Rush, and you've got the 30th anniversary of this edition of this record coming out in mid-April, which is pretty exciting. So I wanted to go track by track with you on Moving Pictures, if we can. I mean, what do you remember from the time that you guys made this record?
So much, really. It was a great summer, for example, when we were doing the songwriting. We'd rented Ronnie Hawkins' farm up near Peterborough, and so there was the classic setup in the barn, you know, and start working on new material. And there was a little cottage on a little lake where I was working on lyrics during the day, and then we'd regroup later in the day, and we were staying up there and going home on weekends, so that perfect kind of a combination of a home life as well as professional life, and just in a great state of mind. By that time, we'd been together for 6 years, and had had enough success to establish us at where the industry wasn't leaning on us anymore about what we were going to do. And there was a real maturity coming of age for us as a band, because we've been doing so much experimenting of all kinds as individual instrumentalists and as a group of instrumentalists, of coming up with like solving puzzles, of playing in odd times and putting big long epics together. And they were for a reason, you know, they were pure exuberance. There was nothing in self-indulgence or so-called pretentiousness about it. It was true boyish enthusiasm that was involved in creating all those things. But then we started whittling them down, and the changes around us are important too in the late 70s. And we were young enough and fan enough to be part of that, and to respond to when punk became new wave, when the punk musicians started to get better. Stuart Copeland was telling me a little while ago that being around that scene at the time, he would say he would see the Sex Pistols bass player looking over Sting's shoulders to figure out what notes go with what notes. Yeah. It's inevitable that you want to get better, I think, no matter what you do. You know, even if you're a punk with an attitude, you play that thing every night, you're going to get better. And so we had responded to that positively, and mentioning the Police, we're big fans of them. I'd been a reggae fan for a long time, and I listened to modern radio at the time, and the new wave was becoming the New Romantics and all these things at that time, and we soaked it all up, and that brought a concision to our arranging, but no less indulgence in that sense. You know, we still wanted it to be hard to play, and something I've realized over the years, every one of those songs was designed to play live. We were a live band, that's all we did, and when I put a drum part together, it was designed to be progressive in the architecture sense, and to be challenging enough to play night after night for, who knew, 30 years. You know, we're playing this whole album now, 30 years later, without cynicism, you know, still liking to play those songs and still proud of them. So that's a lovely way, and it's a fulfillment of the sincerity that was brought to that music at the time, and the honest growth. You know, people joke about progressive bands and something, but we were progressing, learning, you know, and developing taste at the same time. Okay, maybe that giant 7/8 instrumental, maybe we could soak that down to, you know, a little fraction. It would still be good and still be exciting, and it was. You know, those were the lessons we were learning. So that was an important time musically around us, and a great time for the three of us in terms of getting along and sharing our goals and having a good time and making the music.
So as we go track by track on Moving Pictures, then what's the first song that was done?
See, that kind of history hasn't been captured, but I kind of think it was maybe Limelight or Red Barchetta, Why Was That? I know Tom Sawyer came later, because we'd been touring a lot with Max Webster, another Toronto band at that time.
Did Pi Dubois help with that?
And Pi Dubois, as a lyricist, he and I got along. He gave me so many great books. Big pile of books by John Barth, a big pile of books by Lawrence Durrell, and all this great reading that he turned me on to, for one thing, in the years when I was trying to find a life in touring, because I didn't find it much of a life. And at first, a reading hermit became my first evolution of that, and then later bicyclist and motorcyclist. But Pi had a strange way of writing in these exercise books that were just laden with this street, edgy kind of lyricism imagery, and he worked part-time in an insane asylum, you know, and he had a lot of different influences than I did, and they were kind of formless, but I'm good at imposing form, so it made it a great combination where I could extrapolate really good passages for him and give them shape into a song, and then pass them over to Geddy, who could make them singable. And it affected us in a way musically too. I have to think the first time that we collaborated with Pi like that, it gave a certain edge to the music and a certain Max Webster influence in a way too, that pushed us a different way. And one of the tricks we were already using then that we still do is we make up other bands, okay? Today we're not Rush, we're the Fabulous Men. That was our new age band. Or we have an ongoing edgy kind of rockabilly band called Rockin' F. So when we want to bring out a different persona, we say, okay, make this part Rockin' F. That's something we still use. And like not to jump ahead too much, but the song Vital Signs on this, that was definitely the Fabulous Men.
For sure. And you hear the reggae influence as well. On Song Vital Signs. All right, right, so tell me, so that's Vital Signs. Let's go to the top. Tell me about Tom Sawyer.
Yeah.
The legend is it was an accidental discovery of a sound on a keyboard, and there we go.
All that was part of it, but again, we're working in a barn. You know, we have to set up the bucolic atmosphere of it all, and we're just experimenting with zero pressure. And we're just spending time there during the week all together, and then home on weekends. And so it was a true ferment of fun, you know, because there were, again, no consequences. We're improvising and putting things together, all in the room together, too, in those days. So it was very organic also. And those were building. And another important part of a song like Tom Sawyer, and any of these, really, I said they were designed to be played live, and they're also played live many times before they were recorded. So the kind of detail that went into the drum part, for example, I haven't changed barely a note, maybe one fill in Tom Sawyer in 30 years, because it's still challenging and satisfying to play just how I made it up, you know, and that's nice. There are other songs that I have changed from time to time, or newer ones, actually, I'll deliberately design to be freer in my new improvisational mode. But in that day, we played those songs over and over, and we recorded them until all of us played it right.
Yeah.
You know, so necessarily they were played enough times that each time I might add a little detail or a little echo this little rhythmic pattern in the next verse, and build that way architecturally and progress up the song. And people often ask me why I build a drum part that way. Well, it's a performance. You know, I started off simple. For the listener's sake, this is something I learned in writing too, and this song is a great example. First, what does the listener need to know? And they teach you that in writing class. What does the reader need to know? So I state a rhythm as strongly as I can, whether it's a straightforward backbeat 4 like Tom Sawyer is, or something more complicated. When I first state that, I try to make it as clear as I can for the listener. Occasionally trick them on purpose, the turnaround things that you do deliberately because they're fun for musician and listener. But for the most part, like in prose, I have to decide what the reader needs to know first to get the picture I'm trying to send. Drumming exactly the same. Here's the rhythm, and now here's all the ways I'm going to play with it. But first I want to state it clearly, and this song is a perfect example of laying it down.
All right, tell me about Red Barchetta.
Yeah, that came about a magazine story that I'd read some years earlier that I really liked. It was set in a future dystopia when motorized vehicles were banned. And so I just had an idea that it might make a neat little visual song. And we were into a lot of soundtrack mode at that time, too. Geddy was always a big music fan, and we often thought in terms of making the music tell part of the story, something that still engages us now. So that song's very much an example of a cinematic song for us, where the moods and the rhythms go up and down dynamically and shift urgency, all for the purpose of echoing the drama of a little story.
Now, if, and I stress the word if, but if Toronto successfully secedes from Canada, how would you feel about YYZ being the anthem for that new city country?
Yeah, talk about organic release. That came in flying in one time when we were in a small plane and hearing from the cockpit the Morse code rhythm. And I said, oh, wouldn't that be a neat introduction? And then cinematically, again, a perfect example, we thought we'll make this song's an instrumental, but it's about YYZ Airport. It's about airports. So we have kind of the exotic moods shifting around all this, and then the gigantic emotional sort of crescendo of people being reunited and being separated and all that. So it was very consciously kind of a playful cinematic twist on an airport.
I think Primus has covered it. I think also Muse has covered it. When you hear covers of Rush songs,
I haven't, no.
You know, Asia, it's not the same. It's very different with the way Primus
so
plays
it. Should be, yeah.
Limelight. Let's talk about Limelight. A lot's made about that because a lot was then made about your relationship with your fans when they heard that song. So tell me what it was like making that song.
Yeah, it was just my attempt really to explain how it felt. You know, that's really how it was. And I tried to explain that introverts do not understand, or extroverts do not understand introverts. The idea of being shy to them is some kind of poison. If you think back to school days, I read a quote recently that all of us are the people that high school made us. Yeah. Okay, and if shy people in high school, I remember they're stuck up, they're conceited, they think they're better, you know, just for being shy. So that persists, and if you are that way in a public field, unfortunately, it's a huge disadvantage, but it just made me uncomfortable and embarrassed, and I just tried to explain. And I can't tell you how many younger musicians, authors and athletes and actors have come up to me in life and said what that song came to mean. Suddenly they understood, I can't pretend a stranger is a long-awaited friend. Michael Chabon, the author, just said that to me recently when he had a book signing, and with all this expectation of people thinking they know him and his work so well, and he doesn't know them at all. You know, it's a real disadvantage. And there's an old English expression when somebody calls your name, say, hey, George. you have me at a disadvantage. And it is. I don't know you, you know. So anyway, I was just trying it in a really neutral sort of way and hopefully a poetic sort of way, just to explain how it felt and what mattered. You know, really what mattered to us was always the music. It was to be, not to seem.
Well, speaking of high school, the great irony and the great victory for you then is you're the guy that played the Hockey Night in Canada team when it went to TSN.
I would take that, bullies from 50 years ago.
Hockey was not your thing necessarily?
I described it as being intravenously. Of course, I grew up in southern Ontario. Hockey was part of life 6 months of the year, but I was never. In the skates of those days, my little feet were like this. So,
the camera eye.
Title from a John Dos Passos novel of the 1930s, which was very experimental, and he used segments in it like newsreel to describe the events of the day that were affecting his characters. And another one was a kind of stream of consciousness called The Camera Eye, where he panned across the Depression America, and especially on the industrial side, and just reported what he saw, the objective camera eye. And I kind of loved that. And a John Steinbeck quote about every city having a unique quality of light is another influence in that song. They're both personal experience, and that was where I was learning to wed experience and the universal too. I was writing about being in New York on tour probably, but walking around in the spring rainfall that felt kind of like London. And I'd spent an important part of my youth, around 19, 20, 21 years old, in London, struggling for fame and fortune. I didn't know it was in Toronto. I thought it was in London.
Nobody knew it was in Toronto,
Nobody knew it was in Toronto.
Even Neil Young left. Nobody knew it was here.
That's for sure, yeah. So I'd spent quite an important part of my time in London, so I was writing about two powerful first-hand personal experiences, but putting them into images that I had found from other authors to be universal and something that was translatable.
It's an important song that kicks off side 2 of the record, and now people don't even really, only purists really get vinyl now. So when you make a record, do you think about what would be side 2 and all that?
And we still do, you know. Yeah, it used to be such a nice part. It was like making up 2 sets.
Yeah.
You know, the sequence of songs could be 2 sets in a show. And that's certainly the way we always thought of them. And we hated losing the last song on side 1 because it had a certain conclusiveness about it. And we hated losing the opening song on side 2. Well, adapt or perish, you know. One thing we have always done is adapt to the world around us, and we are now to the way the music business is. So yeah, that's it's unfortunate, but it's like lamenting the 12-inch sleeve. That was an awful much nicer platform to work on too for art direction, but is what it was. It is what it was.
It was what it was. It's quite a photo, though. I mean, I love the fact that you got 2112 and dogs playing poker on the cover.
Well, they're moving pictures.
Yeah, they are moving pictures. That's absolutely true. Witch Hunt. When you watch the news today, do you go, wow, Witch Hunt was really ahead of the curve?
Yeah, and it was, of course, reacting to the same sort of mob mentality back in those days. In fact, we were the howling mob out in the snow up at Le Studio in Quebec. I was the rabble-rouser, too, out there. We have to protect our children, and this big uproar behind the intro of the song. But that was one of the, pretty well every album in those days we would make a production number that we didn't have to play live, because we were quite disciplined about being able to reproduce the songs as they were in our individual parts and the overall production. So we would set aside that discipline for one song, and this one, all the overdubs on it and double track drums and keyboards and stuff that later technology made possible. And now, like the overdubbed intro drum-wise has a cowbell playing, different tom-toms, a conga, and electronic toms and all that. So to play it live, I'm playing the cowbell with my foot, and you know the trigger pads to do the electronic drums and stuff. So technology, and Geddy has MIDI now to do the keyboard parts live. So it was ironic that we were just a little ahead of our own curve technologically, and later it caught up, and now we can reproduce pretty well anything we do.
Have you guys ever outthought yourself with all the technology and the multiple drum kits?
We always are. Oh, we got tortured by technology because you know we're always trying out everything as it comes along, and the lack of reliability. And back in The Spirit of Radio has a sequencer in it, 1979. So I had to be able to hear that every night on stage and play along to it. And so it had to be loud enough to make me deaf. And also I had to play accurately enough tempo-wise. The whole song goes by and then the chorus comes, and it has to be in and out right. So that was a great exercise of discipline that has served me really well, to learn to manipulate time and to maybe push the tempo a little bit, but still when that sequencer arrives, or the various effects that we use nowadays that are time relevant, I have to be with them, you know, when it gets there.
We've already talked about Vital Signs, so I'll wrap on this. Now that you're playing this whole record again, what's the one part, if somebody's in the audience, they know that Neil just can't wait to get to? there's one part in one of those songs where in your mind you're like, I can't wait to hit that note?
Every song has that, I'm glad to say, and a lot of them, though, because they're so hard, what sustains that tension for a performer every night is because you're not sure if you're going to be able to do it. I'm sure that's it. And I mentioned before, Tom Sawyer remains so difficult to play. Although it seems a slow tempo, my right hand most of the time is going about as fast as it'll go, and every beat is full force. My feet and hands are playing full force for that whole song. So just to execute it with strength and smoothness, and I mentioned that duality before as something that I've worked all these years in drumming 40 years of wanting to combine those elements of first I wanted technique, and you work hard on technique, and then I wanted accuracy at all strength. Working in the studio with click track sequencers, accuracy was the gold standard. And then I wanted feel, and now I want that combination. When I play these songs now, I know I bring a better feel to them than I did then. I have the strength and power and the speed, but so much more subtle control of time. And that's the rewarding thing. Again, we're in the middle of rehearsing these songs, playing them every day right now after all these years, and I still find myself getting inside them in that rhythmic way and feeling them in more subtle and thus more rewarding ways.